Yes, sir. Okay, we're back. And we were talking about the Moors' influence in Europe. We were talking about if people wanted to obtain more information, since we're in the internet and digital world, how they could obtain the video information from the ACAF. That would be Hidden Colors, and that they have a great variety, library of volumes of information, but those two in particular.
Yes, had there not been the Moors, the North Africans in Spain, or what was called Andalusia, Europe would not have gone through the Renaissance, and the whole history might have been changed.
Okay.
But for the presence of Africans in Europe.
Turn the heat off, please.
But the idea that we're talking about, our people, when you talk about our story, it's just as if, because we don't know our story, it's just as if a man had amnesia. And if a person had no memory of who he was, where he came from, what his skills were, and you drop him off full grown in the world, that man would have little chance of success, because he would not remember who he is, and what he can do.
He never knew.
So unless you know your story, unless you know who you are, where you came from, what you've done in the past, who your family is, you're disconnected. And that's why it's so important to learn about our story, not just our story in Africa, our story how we got here, but our story of triumph while we were here, because we don't often hear about...
In its whole totality.
Exactly, and we don't hear about what we've done. One of my favorite black entrepreneurs is a guy named Robert...
Take your time, brother. It's all good.
Robert Gordon. And Robert Gordon was a coal yard owner. He started out as a servant in Virginia. He was able to buy his freedom from his holder, prisoner of war, the man that held him prisoner of war, for a figure that would amount to $4 or $5 million in today's money.
I think we mentioned that in
He moved to Cincinnati, Ohio. And with this coal process, he found a way to use coal dust, which is dangerous because coal dust exploded. And it was worth nothing economically. He found out a way, through his entrepreneurship, through his genius, creativity, to make coal dust pay. That's how he bought his freedom, and he took that process to Cincinnati, Ohio. And he opened a coal yard in Cincinnati, Ohio. When he opened that coal yard, he became the most successful coal yard operator in Cincinnati, Ohio. Unfortunately, as a result of that, the other coal yard owners banded together to drive him out of business. And what they decided to do is that they would drop the price of coal so low that he couldn't make a profit. That meant that they couldn't make a profit, but they were going to stick it out together and stick with that. So what they did is that they dropped the price of coal so it made no sense for him to sell. But as a way to get around that problem, what he did is he went around to a lot of the light-skinned black people who were in Cincinnati who could pass for white, gave them money to buy out the coal that was selling at a low price at all the other coal yards. So he wound up buying up all the coal in Cincinnati so that he was the only one that had coal. And when he got control of the coal, he started selling it again. He became the wealthiest person in Cincinnati. In today's terms, he would have accumulated over $1.4 billion in his fortune. So great wealth.
What was his brother's name again?
His name was Robert Gordon.
Yeah, we want to look up Robert Gordon. And what area was that?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
What era? Not area.
1840.
1840, okay.
He was in the 1840s.
Okay.
And ultimately, the other coal yard owners got together and made peace with him and made him the head of the Coal Yard Owners Association. So even in that situation, we can be successful. There are some Philadelphia people that I didn't know about. There was a man named James Fortin, born in 1766, and he died in 1842. And he was
a sailmaker?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But he was also a dentist, a carpenter. He was a Minuteman also. And he was also accumulated a great fortune in today's money. That would have been over $1 billion.
That was a whole era of those brothers here in Philadelphia, because I did a lot of research myself personally, and Richard Allen and Stephen Smith and these brothers. What was the? They had a nice documentary on this brother, William Stills.
Yes.
And these brothers that were entrepreneurs, standouts in the community, religious and well-respected human beings.
Well, you mentioned Richard Allen. We're somewhat familiar with Richard Allen, Absalom Jones.
Oh, yeah.
What's interesting about that is during the yellow fever outbreak of 1793, the delegation was sent by some of the wealthy white citizens of Philadelphia, because at that time it was believed that black people were immune to yellow fever.
Immune to the yellow fever.
So,
but eventually they did die.
Yes, they did. But what happened was they went to Absalom Jones and Richard Allen. And what's interesting about that is these were two men of different religious denominations that got together and worked together their whole professional lives, and especially during this yellow fever epidemic. And what happened is there were a lot of people who were not being tended to, because over 1/4 of the population of Philadelphia moved away. So the blacks who
those who had money got out of Dodge.
They got out of Dodge and left. And the blacks were left to tend to the sick and move the dead bodies. And they did this through the whole epidemic of 1793. What's so distressing, and what we have to face is, and it still goes on, at the end of the epidemic, a newspaper article came out, run by one of the publishers of the leading newspapers at that time, that blamed the epidemic on black folks.
On the Africans.
But it was the black folks that actually tended to the people while they were sick. Now, this was later disputed by both Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, and some of their allies and Quakers who were there on the scene and saw what happened. And as you said, a number of black people died also in this epidemic. But had it not been for the intervention and the organizing efforts of Absalom Jones and Richard Allen, Philadelphia may not have continued as the great city that it became.
Brother White, do you know what happened to those yellow fever blankets that they used to cover up the people that were afflicted?
I understand they were sold to indigenous Americans and used in
to wipe out the Cherokee Nation.
Wipe out the Cherokee Nation. Exactly.
And they weren't sold; they were given away. That was part of the reservation. Was it a reservation? Is that what it was?
Trail of Tears and that kind of thing.
No. We're talking about the actual. It was a reservation where they wanted to kind of contain the indigenous people. Yeah,
but they moved them off of the land that was in the South that was viable tobacco and cotton land, and moved them west. Now, what's interesting about that is that a lot of them went to Oklahoma. And one of the things that we have to remember...
Black Wall Street?
Yes, that happened after slavery. Yeah. But since you mentioned it, let's talk about that a minute.
Okay, hold your thought on that. I just want to go back a little bit, because you had said that Richard Allen and Absalom Jones were from two different denominations. And actually, they were in lockstep with each other. But what happened was, because Richard Allen was so successful with the AME Church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Europeans tried to step in and say, well, listen, you know, you got this barn and this old rundown church. We're going to give you a brand new church if you become, I think it was the Presbyterian. Is that correct? Absalom Jones was Presbyterian. Okay, so what happened was Richard Allen said, no, I'm a Methodist. I've been a Methodist all my life. Let Absalom Jones take that church. because they were so tight and they were pretty much in lockstep with respect and so forth. Absalom Jones took over the what was the name of his church?
Well, Mother Bethel was Richard Allen.
No, I'm talking about Absalom Jones.
But I don't remember the name.
I'm going to tell you in a minute. It was the oh boy, I have to come back to that. But anyway, because Richard Allen owned his church and owned the land that it was on, he was able to stay where they are right now at 6th and Lombard. Because Absalom Jones had taken over the church that was given to them by the Presbyterians, what happened was when the land became more valuable, they moved them from Center City up to 52nd and is it Westminster or Wyalusing, somewhere near that area there, you know. So
but there are two things about that pattern that you just mentioned that were repeated over and over in history, and things that we can learn from today. One, that there was a reputation that maybe two black men did not get along, but they did get along.
Oh, they were in lockstep with each other.
But that's a pattern that's been repeated throughout history, whereby you think that people who are actually in conflict or may pretend to be in conflict in front of the white community actually work together.
Oh yeah.
Lockstep to get things done. And that's something that we have to learn today. We may have a public posture, but the idea is that we work together when we work together. And the other thing is that this land displacement, that's one of the disturbing patterns of entrepreneurship and business in this country. At one time, black people owned over 20 million acres in the United States of land. Today, 2012, we own 5 million acres collectively. So there's been a net and absolute loss of land and an increase in population. So one of the things that is so important is that if we have hopes of staying here and developing, that we have to get land, and we have to acquire land and get the land back that we've lost, so that we also are landowners, because being a landowner is one of the paths to business success that we've always followed from day one.
Hold your thought. Pause the camera, please. And we're back. And we were talking about how, check myself out. We were talking about how sometimes you have to give the illusion that things aren't really well between brothers during that period of time, because it played to the stereotype that Europeans had of us, that we couldn't get along. We was always friction, and that we truly were in lockstep with each other in blood and spirit and mind.
Especially,
and we were all going toward the same goal, you know.
And that's something that's been lost in the translation today.
Today,
because you see many times today people argue in front of the camera, but they're also hostile when the cameras are not shining. And that's a recent thing. When you go back to even Booker T. Washington and some of the conflicts that he had with Du Bois allegedly, or Marcus Garvey, they were really in lockstep, especially Booker T. and Marcus Garvey with regard to business, and how people admired him, and there are anecdotes that at the end of his life in Ghana, that Du Bois said Booker T. was that Marcus Garvey was correct. And
but you know what happened real briefly with the Marcus Garvey and Du Bois situation. That kind of played to be able, because Marcus Garvey was such a navy blue black brother, and Du Bois was a kind of paper bag type brother, you know, the paper bag color, and they both were intellectuals. So what happened was I was at the Afro in Baltimore. And we were going through these thick archives that they had of, you know, previous published papers. And so I'm at this early 1900 archive, and so I'm looking at all of the negative reports on Marcus Garvey. Oh, it was like very negative, you know. So I said, well, this is the Afro newspaper. Why would they have negative stories about Marcus Garvey? And so she turned the page. She said, you see that big advertisement in that, from that department store? That's how they got those advertisements. That's how they were able to survive. If you printed negative stories about leaders, the department stores and the big advertisers would be glad to support your paper. If it was all pro-black and all positive and so forth, they weren't interested in that kind of news.
Well, we've had to find ways to survive and ways to cater to the marketplace that we had, and that's one of the ways that it happened. So sometimes it was important, but people understood the game.
Some of them.
Some of them understood, but more understood the game in history than do today.
Absolutely.
And we need to go back to the point where there's some things that are necessary to do for market reasons, but we don't have to carry that animosity in our relations and when we get together to do things.
Like the national wrestling and so forth.
Right, you know, it's all opposed. It's all opposed.
Yeah. And smoke and mirrors.
Right. And sometimes one of the great resources that you talk about, the paper bag and the dark skin, is that one of the resources that we've had as a people is that we do come in all shades.
Oh, absolutely.
And that
all the colors of the rainbow.
And we have
colored people.
Exactly. And we have an opportunity to exploit
Isn't that beautiful, though? Isn't that beautiful?
It's beautiful naturally, and it's beautiful as a way to promote survival.
Absolutely.
Because there have been people who have been able to be places because of their skin tone that other people, because of their skin tone, were not able to be.
Well, they had us believing that being dark-skinned was a badge of degradation. If you were black or navy blue black, you were cursed. There was something wrong with you. The reason why you're going through the trials and tribulations you're going through is because of the color of your skin. But then Brother James Brown came through and said loud, I'm black and I'm proud, and just turned the whole game around.
One of the things that shocked me was just how old the Black Power movement actually is. People were talking Black Power and going back to Africa as soon as they got here. As a matter of fact, James Fortin, Richard Allen, Absalom Jones, all of these people were involved in some way, shape, or form with African American efforts to go back to Africa.
Brother White, everything that they did had the word African in it.
They were not ashamed.
African Methodist Episcopal Church.
Exactly.
Of African Freemasons. African, what was the name of their first insurance? Free African Society, which was the first insurance company open to the public. Look how much money they're making with the insurance companies now.
Well,
founded by Absalom Jones and Richard Allen.
In the era of the internet.
African,
right.
Proud.
In the era of the internet, when much more information is available than was available to them, we ought to look into our story and see these things so that we're better equipped to deal today. One of the women I wanted to mention was a lady named Mary Ellen Pleasant, who was born in 1814.
Where?
She was born in the South. I think it was Georgia, South Carolina. But she was born in the South. And what happened was...
Tell me about this beautiful queen.
What she did is she was a very fair-skinned lady. And her claim to fame is she's known as the mother of human rights in California. And she escaped from slavery and moved to California and began to pass as white. And she married, and her husband became very wealthy. In fact, by 1870, yes, by 1870 they had accumulated a fortune in those days of $30 million, which would be about $50 billion in today's money. This is in 1870. Her husband later died in 1875. But all during her time in California, when she was passing for white, she opened up schools for black men and women, children, hospitals, tended to Mexicans and all that. That's why she's known as the mother of human rights in California. And in her will, when she died childless. it was discovered that she was actually born a slave and escaped to California. So that was one tactic, one stratagem passing that people used to survive. Survive what happened during slavery and post-slavery. So we have opened these avenues, but the thing is, she never forgot who she was. Even though she married one way, she did a lot of philanthropic works in behavior, I mean, in on behalf of black folks.
Tell me, this is so fascinating. Tell me some more about the African entrepreneurs before the Civil War. I love that.
Well, one of the things that...
Do you have any more stories?
Oh, yes. There are very many. One of my favorites is a lady named Duchess Quimino. And she bordered the 17th and 18th, 1700s, 1800s. And what she did, one of the... before slavery, actually before Reconstruction, black folks dominated the barber, hairdressing industry, the catering industry, those kinds of industries. And she actually made enough money baking so that she was able to buy her freedom in Rhode Island, and she opened up a bakery restaurant there and became a very wealthy woman baking. There were various people who were hairdressers and barbers. In fact, there were no white barbers. That was a profession that was looked down upon. There were no barbers that were white until after the Civil War. We dominated certain businesses, and some people became very wealthy, the equivalent of multimillionaires doing those types of business. Another man I want to mention is Jean-Baptiste Disable.
Oh, yeah.
Who was the founder of the city of Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
But he was also a very wealthy man because he was a farmer and trapper. And he was the first resident and founder of Chicago. And that's something, I mean, he founded the city. Another man...
He also laid the foundation for the trail through the Nevada, going from Midwest to the West Coast. They had a big problem with that. A lot of Mormons lost their lives and so forth, you know, not knowing the trail, and got caught in the mountains.
And that's one of the things that I used to, when I was growing up, a lot of people were, this is before James Brown, and I'm black and I'm proud, a lot of people claimed Indian heritage. And sometimes that was because they were ashamed to be African. Oh, yeah. But as a matter of fact, it is true that one of the options that runaway prisoners of war had was to live with the Indian nations.
Absolutely.
And they went to live with the Indian nations, and one of the ways that they were able to hold property is that they identified themselves as Indians instead of as African Americans.
Did you know that they tried to enslave the Indians before they brought us here?
And it was unsuccessful. it was unsuccessful. That's why they still, and they, like as I said earlier, it was the Europeans that were let out of jails because.
But wait a minute, they never wanted to do no work. they was always looking for somebody, man, to tote that barge and lift that bale, and you know, give me all that money, give me that dump truck full of money after you finish.
Well, one of the principles, put in a nicer way, one of the principles of gaining wealth is
during
using,
that period of time.
Yeah, well, even today is using other people's money and other people's time. If you can use other people's money and other people's time, you can become successful. Well, slavery, the institution called slavery, made America wealthy because other people's time was able to be monopolized for 2.5 centuries. And on the basis of that labor, on the basis of that use, was the wealth of this country built.
Okay, I'd like to suggest to our viewers a program that we caught recently called Slavery by Another Name. It was narrated by Brother Lawrence Fishburne, and it was an excellent production on how they continued this peculiar institution after the Emancipation Proclamation. That's a whole nother thing. We'll get into that at another time.
But not really. Here's something as a result of what you just said.
Oh, you thought. Let me see if I can. No, you're good. Let's see if I can brighten this up a little bit. Oh, okay, I think we're going dim there. Go ahead.
Even during Reconstruction afterwards, where we had sharecropping and that kind of thing, some of the facts aren't brought out about aspects of that. For instance, many of us have heard of the Freedman's Bank. The Freedman's Bank was allegedly a bank for former slaves and black Americans after the Civil War. But that's not actually what happened. What happened was there were a number of black units in the Civil War that did not want to be paid. They didn't want to be paid because they were fighting for their freedom. So since they were fighting for their freedom, they didn't want any wages. So their wages were held back. So at the end of the Civil War, there were enough black soldiers and black units that did not want their money, that was the money that was used to form the Freedman's Bank. And the problem with the Freedman's Bank was it was not a bank. It functioned as a charitable institution. But 500,000 black people had accounts at the Freedman's Bank. And no one black had any say on how it was run. And was run like, instead of being run like a bank, taking deposits, giving loans, it was only run as a charitable institution to give away money. So the money taken in, some of it was stolen, mismanaged and all that, but black folks had nothing to do with that. So 500,000 people, when the Freedman's Bank was ultimately closed, 500,000 people lost all their money in that bank. And 500,000 black people. And that was when the population was only 6 or 7 million blacks. So you're talking about a significant proportion of black adults lost all their money. So it's no wonder it was 20 years after the Freedman Bank closed, which black folks had nothing to do with running, they just had accounts there, that the black banks were reformulated again under black control.
Isn't that the bank that they brought Frederick Douglass in on?
The Freedman's Bank?
Yeah.
Yes, but he had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, but he took the blame, though. They really challenged his reputation. When the bottom fell out, like they normally do, they brought the brother in to take the fall. So
well, that's an old historical motif also, to bring the brother in to take the fall.
Take the fall. Hold your thought. Pause. And yeah, we're back. Brother White, this has been a fascinating interview. I'm loving it.
Thank you.
A lot of information, man. You seem to be a bottomless pit of information. That's great that you want to share it like you do, you know?
Well, I think it's important.
Because it's all about hoarding it, you know, and trying to figure out a way to, you know, put it on a scale and give you a little bit, you know?
No, we want this...
Large game in tiny print.
No, we want it in large print so that our children and those who have no hope can understand that their future is in their hands. If people who were in slavery or prisoners of war, indentured, whatever term you want to apply to not having any freedom of choice, were able to get freedom of choice through their own efforts without the aid of anybody else except their own people, if they could do it in those times, with those limited resources, with the opportunities that are available today, our children have no limitations and we have no limitations. What's left for us to do is apply some of the lessons that our ancestors learned already and apply those lessons to today's situation. And one of the, we've talked about some of them. Sometimes it's all right to have a squabble in public, but resolve it behind closed doors like families do. And other times, another thing is, there is no reason why we can't assist other people and assist other communities, because at the end of the day, we have to do business with those other communities. So, yes, sir.
On that note, let's go back to the Black Wall Street.